We had like a bond. We had like spiritual fruitfulness amongst one another.
Antoinetta was quiet. She kept to herself, read her Bible a lot.
I never seen her with a regular book. Even in her bed, she slept in the bed with like 3 Bibles at one time. She was really into it, like it was her thing.
In high school, Antoinetta's religious devotion and introverted personality made her the quintessential wallflower.
Antoinetta was one of the individuals that were outcasts from like the in crowd.
But Antoinetta didn't go completely unnoticed in high school. One young man went out of his way to befriend her. His name was Peter Moses Jr.
Hey, what's going on?
Nothing much.
I was just talking to them, man, and all they talking about is partying, football, and all that. It's not like about you, man, because you know it's more to life than that.
Really?
Yeah.
They had a lot of similarities. He was a very quiet individual. They were both into their education. They stood out from the rest. And I think that's probably what drew them to one another.
For two outsiders like Antoinetta and Peter, their friendship was a godsend. But it soon morphed into something much more.
It wasn't long before the two became high school sweethearts.
Like so many young couples before them, life pulled Peter and Antoinetta in opposite directions after high school.
Peter's family moved from Washington, D.C. to Durham, North Carolina. That move and the distance proved to be an insurmountable hurdle for the relationship.
After high school, they broke up. I mean, it does happen.
Over the next 9 years, Antoinetta focused on her spiritual and professional life.
After high school, she went directly into the working world.
She got a great job. She was thriving as a campus security officer, and she was active in a church.
But while everything seemed to be going well for Antoinetta, the breakup with Peter left a hole in her heart that she longed to fill.
She dated, here and there, but nothing too serious. Finding love for Antoinetta was very important for her because she wanted a family of her own. So she still had faith that there's nothing too big for God.
But the more true love seemed to elude her, the more Antoinetta's faith was tested, especially when a routine visit to the doctor yielded some truly crushing news.
Netta found out that she could not have children. It was the most devastating thing for her ever. Netta went through time periods of depression and sadness because that's all she ever thought about was being a mother.
But in January of 2010, just as Antoinetta seemed to hit rock bottom, she received a message on social media that looked like the answer to her prayers.
DeAndre!
What?
Guess who contacted me? Peter Moses.
Your old boyfriend from high school?
Yeah.
Netta was excited about reconnecting with him, and eventually they set a date for him to come up and meet with her, which he did. And then they had spoke about her coming to visit him.
It was a trip that would change Antoinetta's life.
This house was a 5,000 square foot home in a really nice neighborhood, 2-car garage.
Look at the sea. I was driving up and I can't believe how beautiful your house is. This is amazing.
Thank you.
Peter explained that he shared the home with his extended family.
I live here with my aunts. I live upstairs and they live downstairs.
Antoinetta spent that afternoon getting to know Peter's family. During that visit, the bond they had shared in high school was instantly reignited.
He told her she was beautiful and she felt affirmed by him.
For the next few months, Antoinetta traveled back and forth between her job in D.C. and Peter's home in Durham. Then in the summer of 2010, Peter said the words Antoinetta had been waiting her entire adult life to hear.
I think we should get married.
Really?
Yeah, will you marry me?
Yes.
She told her family, I have finally found the man of my dreams.
Netta was very happy because you've been praying for specific things, and then these things just come from out of nowhere.
So she packs her things and she hits the road for Durham, North Carolina.
It was presumed that they would live happily ever after.
But for Antoinetta McCoy, this fairy tale was about to take a very strange and mysterious turn. One that would not only give her family cause for concern, but would ultimately connect Antoinetta with that frightened young woman in the Durham police station, the one who claimed a young child had been murdered.
It was just shocking that all of these cases were linked.
It was hard to fathom that something this evil could happen to people in such a peaceful place.
In the summer of 2010, after reuniting with her high school sweetheart Peter Moses, 28-year-old Antoinetta McCoy feels like she's living a fairy tale.
They reconnected via Facebook, and they were communicating via Facebook for a while.
She finally saw the man of her dreams. He also has a house. He has all these established things that she's not used to experiencing with men up in D.C., and she was taken. For once, she felt like she fit in.
She left her home in Washington, D.C., to move with Peter Moses in his home in Durham, North Carolina.
Everything was phenomenal.
But then, shortly after Thanksgiving, Antoinetta falls off the radar.
They did not hear from her for weeks, and that was different from her normal routine.
We got the happy Thanksgiving text and all that. Christmas, nothing. When my mother's birthday pays, that's when I knew for a fact without a shadow of doubt, this is not making sense. My mother and my sister were like best friends.
For more than a month, calls to Antoinetta's cell phone go unanswered. On February 1st, 2011, Antoinetta's family contacts the D.C. Police Department.
Tim? Yes, I want to file a missing person report on my sister, Antoinetta McCoy.
Typically, you file a missing persons report where you last saw the person, which is why Antoinetta's family filed a report in D.C., though they thought she may have last been in Durham.
Okay, is she
Married?
No, she's engaged.
Have you tried to contact her fiancé? Yes, I tried contacting him.
Peter did not once pick up the phone and call me back, and so that drew a red flag for me.
Later that day, missing persons investigators reach out to Peter Moses. What Peter tells them seems plausible.
Peter told investigators that she left on her own because she was upset about an issue with money.
Have you talked with her family at all?
You know, it wasn't my place to tell her family that we wasn't together no more.
He thought that's something she would do.
He thought she went back to Washington.
To police, Peter's explanation seems reasonable. They know that in cases like Antoinetta's, people don't always contact family right away. They may need time to think, or they may be too embarrassed to admit that the relationship fell apart so quickly.
While D.C. police continue their search for Antoinetta, 250 miles away in Durham, investigators are puzzling over another case, the bizarre claims of a young pregnant woman named Tanya Henry.
Tanya shows up at the Durham police station, and she is terrified. What she has to tell them is not only outrageous, it's disturbing.
Start with the crazy stuff you say is going on. I mean, we want to help you.
She said she was part of a cult, that a child had been killed, placed in a suitcase, and stuck up in the attic.
You were witness to these things?
Yes.
The address she gave for the location of this cult was in a more upscale area of Durham, which is why this story was so unbelievable.
Still, in the interest of public safety, detectives have a responsibility to investigate.
There was a detective that was working that evening that took the information and started to do some basic follow-up on it.
The next morning, two detectives pull up to the well-manicured home. An attractive woman in her mid-20s, who identifies herself as Vanya Sisk, answers the door.
Can I help you?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry to bother you. We're from the Durham Police Department. We had an eyewitness say that there was a situation we need to check out over here.
Okay.
He said there was a body in your attic.
What?
Yes, ma'am.
That's crazy.
You mind if we come in and take a look around?
No, of course not.
Police officers actually go to the attic. You know, they look around and they didn't see anything wrong.
But before leaving, detectives make one additional request.
Are there any kids that live here?
Yes, there are.
May we see them?
Sure.
The children were all in a bedroom, from infant size to 5 or 6 years old.
They're here, ma'am?
Yes.
Hi.
How many kids live here?
8.
Are you the mother of all of these children?
No, there are 2 other ladies that live here, Lavada and LaRonda. LaRonda has 5, and I have 3.
Vanya basically explains that all of these women wanted to live in this house all together. They could pool their resources, they could live there comfortably, they liked the neighborhood, and it was enough space for all of their children.
You guys are good?
To detectives, this hardly seems like the bloodthirsty cult described by Tanya Henry.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
They were, for lack of a better term, ordinary women.
With no evidence of a crime, it would seem Tanya's story is nothing more than the ramblings of a troubled young woman.
She seems so off-kilter that she could have been mentally unstable. It's possible that she may have something against one of the women who live in the house, or is making the story up. Really, any of these situations are more likely than a murder at the house where the detectives just came from.
But in the days to come, a startling discovery would prompt police to take another look at the unsuspecting home on Pear Tree Lane and the seemingly kind-hearted women who live there.
It's unbelievable to think things like that happen in our society, or any society for that matter.
1. After an unnerving exchange with 16-year-old Tanya Henry, police in Durham, North Carolina have searched a home on Pear Tree Lane in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Tanya claims the residence is home to a deadly cult and that the cult's members were hiding the body of a 4-year-old boy in their attic. But what detectives find inside doesn't exactly gel with Tanya's story.
This was a nice middle-class home in the middle of southeast Durham. There was no sign of any violence, there was no body in the attic, and the children appeared well taken care of.
It seemed like perhaps Tanya had an axe to grind with all of these women.
But as the days roll by, one of the detectives who searched the home begins to have second thoughts.
Did it seem weird to you in there with those kids? They were quiet. They were still. They just don't act like any kids I've ever been around.
These detectives were at the house for an hour, and these children sat in this room, totally reverent, not speaking, not moving around, not fidgeting.
That just seems unheard of for children of that age.
She got very curious about it and started doing a little digging.
Social services in their community had reported to the police and had in their records that there were a total of 9 children that should have been in that home.
There should be 9, not 8.
So the question became, what happened to that 9th child?
On February 20th, detectives returned to the residence on Pear Tree Lane, hoping to account for the 9th child.
Social service records states that there should be 9 children living here. But earlier when we met with you, you said it was 8.
Right.
Where's the other child?
My oldest son, Jaden. He sometimes stays with his babysitter.
You have a phone number you can give us?
Of course.
Where's Jaden's father?
He lives in Atlanta. We're divorced.
And what about the other children? Where are their fathers?
Actually, he lives here with us.
They all have the same father?
Yes.
He had 3 different women in his mind that he was married to, and all of these women lived together, and they all had children.
He was never legally married to any of these women. They consider themselves his wives because they live together with him in unity.
It's a revelation made all the more troubling by the fact that it mirrors some of the claims made by Tanya Henry the night she arrived at the downtown station begging for help.
Tanya had said that multiple women were having sex with one man. So this admission by Vania, Lavada, and LaRonda seems to corroborate at least part of Tanya's statement.
Detectives pressed the women for more details about their plural marriage. Turns out their bond is religious in nature.
They consider themselves all Black Hebrew Israelites, which holds that African Americans are the true descendants of the ancient Israelites. Like any religion, the beliefs of the Black Hebrew Israelites vary from group to group. Some are more mainstream, some are more extreme.
Some Black Hebrew Israelites believe that pretty soon there's going to be a race war, and the African Americans are basically going to be the supreme race over all other races.
According to these women, their husband, who they refer to as Lord, not only believed in the coming race war, but also polygamy, which put him at the very extreme end of the Black Hebrew Israelites' belief system.
Where's your husband now? Is he working? Where is he?
He's out on the air, and our Lord doesn't work.
The women referred to him as my Lord.
Women would go out and earn money and bring it back and give it to him.
They also have social support through welfare and stuff like that.
It is clear that this family has some religious beliefs that are outside of the mainstream. Does it mean that they're capable of murdering a child? That is way over the top.
The best way to get the answers they're looking for is to find this 9th child, Jaden Higginbotham, who supposedly is temporarily staying with his babysitter.
What raised yet another red flag was that when the detectives checked the number that Vania gave for Jaden's babysitter, the number was disconnected.
It was quite apparent to the police investigators that she was trying to cover up critical information from them about where this little boy could have been.
With their suspicions mounting, detectives decide it's time to expand their investigation.
They canvassed the area to see if there were any witnesses that had seen the boy recently or noticed anything suspicious.
Though no one has information on the child in question, one neighbor reveals that she did witness something odd outside the home the previous December.
I saw a young lady running outside in her nightgown, and a couple of girls running after her.
She's like, yeah, I remember this girl coming running and these women coming running and are tackling her in my front yard.
Then a man came out and they all just settled down and went back inside.
He began to direct the women to bring this woman back to the house, and they eventually took her back into the home.
Detectives show the neighbor photos of the 3 women living in the home and also of Tanya Henry. But she says that the woman that she saw running from the house was someone else.
You didn't think about calling the cops?
No, because I thought it was some type of group home for bad girls or something.
The neighbor just thought it was a situation where you had this mentally ill or mentally challenged person and had escaped from this group home.
But who is this mystery woman? And where is 4-year-old Jaden Higginbotham? As the days roll by, those questions continue to gnaw at detectives.
It's just like overload. And everyone's sitting there looking like, man, something's going on there.
On March 3rd, 2011, less than a month into their investigation, authorities officially declared Jaden Higginbotham a missing person. Without concrete evidence of a crime, investigators pressed forward and hit pay dirt through the missing persons database.
Some information on this case was put into a database that goes nationwide, and a detective in D.C. picked up on it through that system. So that detective got in touch with the officers here in Durham.
He was working on a missing persons case involving a woman, and he said that his case might be linked to the missing child case they were working on.
The detective in D.C. said he was investigating the disappearance of Antoinetta McCoy.
But what did Antoinetta McCoy have to do with the polygamous sect of Black Hebrew Israelites, or the case of a missing child? When detectives begin to unlock the truth, no one can believe what they find.
It is repulsive.
That 4-year-old Jaden Higginbotham is missing and may be dead. At least if self-proclaimed former cult member Tanya Henry is to be believed.
After detectives in North Carolina uploaded information to a national database about Jaden's case, a detective in Washington, D.C. saw the information, and he thought that it probably could be related to the disappearance of 28-year-old Antoinetta McCoy.
But what makes investigators so sure Antoinetta's disappearance is related to that of 4-year-old Jaden?
According to Antoinetta's family, she was living with Peter Moses and his extended family in a Durham suburb on Pear Tree Lane.
When Durham detectives get the address of Peter's house, it's a match.
It was the same address that the detectives were investigating regarding the disappearance of Jaden Higginbotham.
Detectives are thinking that Peter Moses' so-called extended family could be these 3 women who claim they share a husband, and that the man they refer to as Lord could be Peter Moses.
Could Antoinetta have escaped and taken Jaden with her in order to protect him? It seems plausible.
With so many X factors at play, Durham police appoint Detective Charles Soule to head up the investigation. For Soule and his team, the first step is to sit down with the alleged former cult member, Tanya Henry.
Tanya, we are trying to figure out what happened to Jaden Higginbotham, but we're also trying to figure out what happened to a woman who was supposedly engaged to Peter Moses.
Okay.
Now, when you were living in Peter's home, do you remember another woman named Antoinetta McCoy?
Yes, I do.
And do you know where Antoinetta is now?
Yes, I do, actually.
According to Tanya, when Antoinetta moved in, she did not realize that Peter was in a polygamous relationship with her and 3 other women, but it didn't take her long to figure it out. Antoinetta was so desperate for love and to have a family that she was willing to accept this if it meant that she could be with Peter.
Who's your Lord?
You are.
That's right.
But according to Tanya, while Antoinetta may have begrudgingly accepted the polygamous aspect of her and Peter's relationship, she had grave concerns about the religious doctrine Peter was preaching.
Antoinetta was raised in the church. Some of the things that Peter Moses was preaching was very inconsistent with her knowledge of the Bible.
Tanya tells detectives that nothing made Antoinetta more uncomfortable than when Peter turned his preachings to 4-year-old Jaden, Vanya's son from a previous relationship.
That's what I'm talking about right there. Jaden is a curse to this family.
Black Hebrew Israelites are strongly against homosexuality, and Jaden's father was openly gay.
The other people in the house were under the impression that he possibly could have been gay because his father was gay, and they shunned on that. The other people in the house were afraid to show him extra love because of what Peter was enforcing. Anetta took up extra time with him. The love that he was lacking from his own mother, she provided him with that love.
Tanya says Antoinetta's affection for Jaden didn't sit well with his mother, Vanya's sister.
Vanya could not take Antoinetta because she didn't have the courage to love her child. but my sister did.
Antoinette was somewhat being cast out of their fellowship, if you will.
Tanya says that in early November, Antoinette went to visit her family. When she returned a few days later, young Jaden was nowhere to be found.
It was as if he'd been erased from the family.
She was giving conflicting stories about what happened to him.
According to Tanya, a few weeks later, Antoinette learned the horrible truth.
She overheard one of the women speaking about his death. That's how she found out that Jaden was ultimately killed.
I'm just so glad it wasn't me and that Peter was able to kill him, because I don't think I could.
She really lost it at that point.
Get her! Go!
She actually ran out of the house. And Pete basically instructed these women, you better go get her.
There was no way that he was going to let her leave.
Get down!
This story is particularly chilling because this confirms that Antoinette was the woman seen running from the house back in December.
So Tanya, what exactly happened when they brought her back in the house?
They killed her.
And why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you call the police?
Because I was afraid they would kill me too.
Tanya explains to investigators how Antoinette was brutally beaten and ultimately shot to death that night in December.
She told detectives that after that night, she feared for her own safety. She decided to lay low for a few weeks until she could finally escape and come forward.
Based on the information that we had from Tanya, 1 of 3 search warrants was executed at the home.
But when detectives knock on the door, there's no answer. Upon gaining entry, they are shocked to discover the house is empty.
They're gone.
All of their belongings are gone.
They had left. They're in flee mode.
But where had Peter Moses, his 3 wives, and their 8 children gone? Before police can answer that question, they make another horrific discovery.
He believed in what he was doing. He was passionate about it. And the women gassed him up. They were his fuel.
With this particular type of cult, a lot of it has to do with manipulation, and it has a lot to do with control. The control aspect of any type of cult is to remove the individual followers from the outside world. This is what Peter Moses was such an expert at doing. He would convince these women they are not part of the outside world. The world that they lived in was inside that home.
The morning blooms with burritos filled with fluffy eggs and breakfast classics for just $1. The $1 grilled breakfast burritos on Taco Bell's morning value menu. Value beyond belief.
Another delay? But you keep bouncing like I'm a bouncy castle. Oh yeah, 5 stops, 0 leaks. We're crushing this commute.
Huggies Little Movers, our best fitting diaper that fits like a hug. Hug on.
Owe the IRS back taxes? Who can you count on? Jackson Hewitt. With 35 years of trusted tax experience, count on us to take immediate action to help. You'll get a free consultation, plus $100 back if you don't like the options we present. That's right, $100 back. You can relax and live your life. We'll work directly with the IRS so you don't have to. Call or visit jacksonhewitt.com for your free consultation today.
I can't tell you who I am or what I witnessed, but I can tell you Liberty Mutual customized my car insurance so I only pay for what I need. No.
Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
There are those who stand forever ready. Ready to defend the nation. Ready to fight for what matters. No matter what.
Do
you have what it takes? Find out at goarmy.com/warriors.
Is he going back to the salad bar? It's endless ribs at Golden Corral. Blue Ribbon smoked baby bags. And hickory bourbon grilled?
They all had self-esteem issues, and he knew how to manipulate and exploit that.
Antoinette, because she had low self-esteem, was certainly subject to being victimized by Pete Moses.
When Peter's mind games didn't work, he would resort to violence to keep his wives in line.
He used physical punishment as the impetus for getting them to acquiesce to what he wanted.
According to Antoinette's journal, rather than blaming Peter for the physical and emotional abuse he inflicted, Antoinette blamed herself.
She really did think it was her fault that he was beating her or that he was sexually unsatisfied with her, which according to the journal was true, at least when it came to Antoinetta's inability to have children.
In those journals, she also had like pleas in there to him, like, my Lord, please forgive me, I'm sorry. Because one of the things with Antoinetta was that she couldn't reproduce.
When Peter found that out, he was not happy about it.
As heartbreaking as Antoinetta's diary is, it's not the most telling discovery detectives make inside the house.
We turn your flashlights off, please.
There was evidence that corroborated that a serious assault or a murder had occurred.
There was blood found in the garage. There was evidence of blood in the bathroom. There was a bullet lodged in a location in the bathroom. And there was a shell casing found in the house.
We found Jaden's baby book with his inked impressions of his feet and pictures of him when he was newborn that no mother would abandon. That convinced me that, Jaden was gone.
Durham police issue a nationwide bolo alert for Peter and his wives. 4 days later, a tip comes in from Vania Sisk's hometown of Colorado Springs, Colorado.
They go to Colorado and secure somewhere to live. And during that time, Vania runs into Jaden's grandmother in a store, and she confronts Vania and calls 911.
According to Jaden's grandmother, Peter, his 3 wives, and the 8 surviving children are all living at a house on the west side of town. Within hours, a team of officers descends on the family's new home. They arrest Peter Moses and extradite him to North Carolina. There, prosecutors make the difficult decision not to charge Peter with murder, but rather with 2 counts of kidnapping.
While there was evidence of an assault and possibly murder, it's a lot easier to prove the kidnapping without the body than, of course, to prove the homicide without the body.
Meanwhile, back in Colorado, Peter's 3 wives, Vania Sisk, Lavada Harris, and LaRonda Smith, are allowed to remain free.
It was kind of the theory of like separating the head from the snake, and he was incarcerated. And we figured eventually, they would find no reason to cooperate.
But even with Peter behind bars in North Carolina, the 3 women remain unwavering in their devotion to him.
We monitored his phone calls because they were very intent on calling him. And on these calls, he would still exert control over them. And they would individually get on the phone and each tell him, I love you, I love you. His control was total with him. None of them gave him up in their statements.
Nearly 4 months pass and the bodies of Antoinetta McCoy and Jaden Higginbotham are still nowhere to be found. Then on June 8, 2011, there's an unexpected break in the case.
A plumber was working on a house and stumbled upon a bag containing human remains. It turned out to be the body of Antoinetta McCoy.
We had all kinds of electronic and physical surveillance on these folks. And one of the addresses that was significant to our surveillance is this address, because it was a prior residence for them.
About 15 feet away from where her body was found, they came across the remains of Jaden. He was actually wrapped in a baby blanket, his own baby blanket.
We were able to get an arrest warrant, and we started picking the folks up throughout that day and that evening.
With the entire cult now in custody, detectives believe it's just a matter of time before one of them breaks their code of silence regarding the crimes. But perhaps the biggest shock is who among them decides to sing first.
Everyone was in disbelief.
That's what cowards do. All talk and no bite.
On June 10, 2011, after discovering the decomposing bodies of 28-year-old Antoinetta McCoy and 4-year-old Jaden Higginbotham in the backyard of an otherwise unassuming residence, police in Durham, North Carolina have officially charged polygamous cult leader Peter Moses with murder, along with his 3 wives, Vania Sisk, Lavada Harris, and LaRonda Smith.
This was huge news in Durham.
Shortly after the arrests are made public, Durham County prosecutors announced they will be seeking the death penalty against all 4 defendants.
The death penalty was definitely in play because of his premeditation and deliberation.
But even as they face the death penalty, Peter's 3 wives continue to stand behind him.
The wives refused to give up any information that would incriminate Peter Moses.
However, as the case makes its way toward trial, it becomes clear that Peter Moses doesn't share the same devotion to his wives as they do to him.
His attorneys reached out and said, Peter wants to make a deal.
The case didn't even go to trial. Peter took the plea deal, and as a result,
He's serving 2 consecutive life sentences where he could have faced the death penalty. Peter told everything. He explained in detail how these murders happened, and he also made sure to say that his wives had a hand in this.
It was up to the other women. I said, yo, want to kill her? And they raised their hand and said, yeah.
When we were talking about cooperating with him, I mean, it was a deal with the devil.
But in cases like this, if a defendant is willing to plead to a significant sentence, it makes sense to avoid trial.
This man preyed on these women, convinced them to follow him, and even kill for him. And they're still defending him. And he turned on them without a second thought.
I had the displeasure of talking to him for multiple hours when he confessed. He wasn't at all remorseful. I mean, like a sociopath. I mean, someone that could kill you and not think twice about it. Very disturbing.
Peter calmly lays out the details of 4-year-old Jaden's murder.
It was brought to Pete's attention that Jaden had touched one of the kids on his bottom.
Peter Moses felt as though Jaden may grow up to be homosexual because at 4 years old, he touched the buttocks of another one of the children living in the home.
Like when you gay, you gotta die.
Peter says that's when he ordered the women out of the room.
So he got his gun, he grabbed Jaden and shot him in the back of the head. I mean, obviously any murder is horrific, but I mean, a child, you know, just multiplies it. And I mean, Jaden wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just a kid being a kid.
He went to Vania and shared with her that he shot her 4-year-old in the back of the head. He said that she just cried a little bit. She stopped crying. They went and had sex. And then the next thing you know, it's go on with your life. Just like that.
What stood out to me the most was that someone can have that much control over people and their minds that they control their behavior.
But for prosecutors, it was Antoinetta's violent murder that demonstrated just how much control Peter Moses exerted over his wives.
When Antoinetta learned that Jaden was killed, she made a desperate attempt to leave the house. When Peter learned that she had tried to escape, he had the other women of the house bring her back.
Hey, bring your ass inside.
Peter physically beat Antoinetta and made the other women of the house watch. They later joined in.
They tortured her. They urinated on her.
They tried to strangle her with an extension cord.
Nobody get between the family, you get what I'm saying?
It was a torturous situation that went on there, and then eventually, according to Pete, Vania shot her in the head.
She obviously was willing to go to just about any height to protect Pete from facing justice for killing her son, to the point where she was willing and did kill Antoinetta.
Once the 3 wives learn that their lord, Peter Moses, has turned on them, they all come clean about their involvement.
All the women in this case pled guilty to murder. They all pled into significant sentences.
LaRonda received a sentence in the neighborhood of a minimum of 23.5 years. Lavada pled guilty to accessory after the fact, and in total received a minimum sentence of 12 years. Vania 6 received a sentence of a minimum of 30 years.
If I could say anything to Vania, I would tell her I feel pity for her. And Pete Moses, you should be ashamed of yourself. You are a poor, ridiculous excuse for a human being. And I hope you get everything that you deserve in life. Everything.
And though nothing can bring back Antoinetta and Jaden, their story serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when those